to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me here, Carmen.
Gosh, I'm so excited to have you here. I would love for you to introduce yourself for the World Wide Web and tell us your pronouns and a little bit about who you are.
My name is Rose, Rosalind Montoya. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. Either one is okay. I'm a transgender, non-binary woman. I do makeup, I model, I advocate for my community by sharing my story, and, I try to be the person that I needed when I was younger because I didn't have anybody to look up to, that was sharing their story. I didn't know the language for my own identity.
I completely can identify with that because I felt similarly growing up. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small little farm town in the middle of nowhere, Idaho. I was raised on a farm until I was 6. I went to high school in Boise, the capital of Idaho, which is a little bit larger, still a very small city.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very conservative, religious.
Wow.
It was kind of a isolated, sheltered upbringing for sure.
And we met in Seattle, so I'm kind of interested, like, how did you get from Idaho to Seattle? Because those are completely different. Like, one, I want to know what brought you to Seattle, and what was that adjustment like coming from, like, Idaho to Seattle?
Mm-hmm. Girl, I needed to get as far away as possible. So, growing up, I really disassociated. And so how I kind of coped with feeling that internalized shame from religion and society, but obviously being a queer person, I wanted to prove myself and that I could do something right. So I dove myself right into my studies. I was a straight A student. And so I actually graduated high school with an associate's degree because I went to a choice school where I could take like dual enrollment classes. So one class would count for both high school and college credit. And so I applied to colleges as far away as I could in every large liberal city I could think of, so like New York, Chicago, LA, Seattle, I just needed out. And I got into some incredible schools, but I got the most scholarship at Seattle University. And so I was like, I'm independent now. Like, I didn't grow up in a super supportive household for LGBTQIA people. So, I just knew I had to do this on my own. So I was like, you're giving me the most money, I'm going there. So I chose Seattle, and it was such an easy adjustment. It was immediate. It was like coming home for the first time. It's weird to explain because my mom came with me, and that was very emotional to like say goodbye to my mom. It like really hit me in the face. Like, this is it. I'm independent. I'm on my own. I got to figure this out. And, like I knew how much love she still had for me. Everything, my family ever did was solely out of love and wanting what's best for me, even if that didn't always come across, the most supportive or in the way that I wanted it or needed it at the time. But I immediately made friends in Seattle. I felt so connected. There were rainbows everywhere. Like the parent weekend, just a few months after my first semester, when my family came up to visit me, I think it was my dad, literally was like, this is like Sodom and Gomorrah. Because there's just rainbows everywhere. There's flags and, people holding hands on the street. I'd never witnessed that. I'd never seen, a same-sex couple, a queer couple holding hands in public, right in front of me. Never witnessed that. So to me, it was just like, what is this heaven? Like, what is this gay heaven that I'm walking into? So I loved it. I immediately felt connected. I still love this city. I miss it all the time.
Well, the city misses you too.
Oh,
for sure. I have to ask though, like because you also came out during your time at SU, or was it shortly thereafter you came out as trans? And you also, I want to hear about that journey because it sounds like coming to Seattle, you being in that environment similar to me. It made you kind of feel comfortable to explore that your identity and like come out into your own.
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear that story, because I also think you were away from home. You were in a different state, so you were going through this journey by yourself in a way, and I want to hear more about that. And also, you also identify as a transgender, non-binary femme woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to hear more about that, because I think a lot of people have a hard time grasping the idea and concept of gender, because we're so set on the binary when that isn't what gender is by any means. And so I'd love to hear that journey
All of
and
that.
how they connect for you. I want to hear how they connect for you.
Absolutely. So it's kind of a two-part question. The first part I'll answer about, being so involved in, the culture in Seattle and on Seattle University's campus. I was able to meet a trans person for the first time. So growing up, I had always been in choir, literally almost every single year, except for like the 2 years I was going through puberty, because my voice was changing and I had this weird dysphoria that I didn't know how to explain or understand at the time. Looking back, that's what it was. But because my voice dropped so low, I could sing the highest pitches to now the lowest. So that was hard for me. But in going into college, I wasn't sure I wanted to do choir, but in the end, I ended up doing it, and I'm so thankful I did. Because the first time I learned the word transgender, it was watching Orange is the New Black and meeting Sophia Bassett. I forget her last name in Orange is the New Black, but Laverne Cox plays this wonderful character, that just gave me so much life. Like, I became so obsessed, and I didn't understand why, because when I first heard about this idea of like a drag queen or a cross-dresser or someone that doesn't fit into the stereotypical binary of gender, I was extremely uncomfortable with that idea. Just coming from where I was, what I knew, the information I was given, I wasn't comfortable with that. But I think also part of that uncomfortable, why I was so uncomfortable, is because of my own internalized shame and transphobia against myself that I had. And so meeting a trans person in real life at Seattle U in choir, that changed my world, because I was like, this is a real person I can get to know, I can connect with, I can hug, I can sing right next to. They just really helped me. We ended up becoming close friends. They answered every single one of my ridiculous questions I had. That was just so beneficial to me. And to be surrounded by so many people that felt the same way as me for the first time, because I felt so alone and so isolated growing up in Idaho. And, in Idaho, I met many lesbian and gay people, but that was the only real exposure I had to the community. I knew a few bi people as well, but, in that time, in that community, there's already a lot of bi erasure, let alone, within our own community, but then within our own selves, that was a thing. But it was just, Seattle U just really, really gave me a lot of freedom and comfort, because when I told people that I was gay or just attracted to men, is usually how I phrase it now. When I told people that, it took me a while at first, because I was so scared, because, these are all new people. I don't know anybody. I have no one on my side here. No one knows me here. So I didn't know when to disclose that information. And I have dated women, before I came out as gay, and so I mentioned that to this group of friends that I was getting to know. And I was just like, yeah, I've dated women, blah, blah, blah. And when I came out as gay, they're all like, wait, I thought you dated women. And I was like, but immediately they all accepted me. It didn't faze them at all. Nothing changed. If anything, it brought us closer. And so, just that environment, I just never witnessed. So to have such a welcoming, warm environment, it made it easier to come out as trans later, because I I knew that I had a lot of these weird feelings going on inside, but I was just becoming comfortable with my sexuality and being into men. And so I thought being gay kind of explained my effeminacy, and just all my likes and interests and how I feel. I was like, oh, I'm just gay. That makes sense, like gay people can do drag, whatever. Um, but then I went to a drag show for the first time, and they were having an amateur like drag race, and they invited me, to stand up. Like they asked random people in the audience, like, stand up if you want to come to this amateur drag race. And I was like, okay. And I was picked. And when I was made up in drag, I actually had to go to the restroom to just kind of break down, to face myself, because seeing myself as a woman all dressed up and feminine just really shook me at my core. I was just like, oh my God, there's something about this, something felt right, something felt connected. And then when I performed and had all of these people love and adore me, I won the drag race, so like to have that type of affirmation from the entire university, like this is the biggest event on campus. It sells out in days. Like they're standing room only. Like it's so crowded in the largest conference room on campus. And oh my goodness, like that just brought me to tears afterward, because I received all of this love, support, and acceptance for, presenting in a hyper feminine, over exaggerated way that I never knew was possible, And so that's when I started questioning myself. This was freshman year, my first year in college. I was technically like a junior, but I was also a freshman. So just my first year at college is, when this moment was. And from then on, I started questioning myself, like, could I be trans? What's going on? Like, am I even a man? No, like, what does this mean? So about a year later, I think it took that long of questioning myself, of talking to, people online, to other trans people, to this trans person I had met in choir. And I had to process that, I had to prove to myself this is real and this is valid. I studied really dry, dense literature. Like I'm talking like Judith Butler, Kate Bornstein, like some old feminist queer theory, gender theory, like some dense stuff that's not easy for the average person to read. A lot of it, I was like, what am I reading? But that helped prove to me that this is real. I needed that very logical, philosophical, because that's what I had come from. That's who I was. I was so obsessed with studying and researching and being a good student, because I could prove my worth in that way. And so I had to prove my identity was worth something in that same way in order to understand, because everything, my whole identity was God, was religion before I came out as, attracted to men. And it took, all the way until college before I could actually accept, I don't believe in God. I don't believe religion. I don't believe all these things I was taught. And that's when, after doing all of that research, for a year, that's when I was finally like, oh shit, okay, so I'm trans. Now what? So I went to therapy, and then Caitlyn Jenner came out. And then Laverne Cox came and spoke at my university. So then I started hearing all of these positive stories of these people, living these extraordinary lives, having success, being trans, being supported. And I was like, I can do this. If she can do it, if she can do it, if they can do it, if all these people are supported and, doing good, maybe I can do this too. Oh, and Aidan Dowling came and spoke at my university earlier that year too. And so meeting, all of these people, I was just like, I can do this. And so I did. So I came out, in the spring of 2015, a few months before I graduated. And then I started presenting full-time the day of graduation. I wore red stilettos. I wore a full beat of makeup, and my family all came. All my friends from high school came. Well, not all, but, the majority of them. And I was just like, here I am with my full beat, with my red stilettos, like, deal with it. And, I didn't say anything, but I think my appearance said enough, that they all kind of knew what was going on, even if they were in denial. But I formally came out once and for all in August of 2015. I wrote a 20-page letter explaining this entire story I just shared to my family, kind of just saying, this is who I am, these are, this is all of what I've learned. This is all of my experience. These are the conclusions I've drawn. These are some great resources that I had to, research in order to understand. So here they are for you as well. And, that was a rough process, but we're here a decade later or 5 years later, and a decade from coming out as gay, 5 years from coming out as trans. And, I have a huge, loving, supportive family and support system now, and that's beautiful.
I'm so appreciative of you just sharing your story, because I almost got teary-eyed when you were telling me about how you dress up on graduation day, because that's such a powerful day, and it doesn't you had such a powerful experience. You're just 2 years, you were 18 years old, coming to a completely new city. You were just thrown into this, and you leaned into it. You leaned into this discomfort. You taught yourself, you educated yourself. And I'm in awe a little bit. How does that journey connect with you also coming out as non-binary? And the point of this podcast for me is to help educate. It's kind of an extension of education for me, I think. And so, not everyone kind of grasps the concept of the non-binary. And not a lot of people even know that non-binary and the gender spectrum existed way before the binary. And I'd love to hear how those two journeys kind of connected.
Absolutely. Well, the first person that I actually met and connected with that is trans is a non-binary person. So that's why I keep saying they for this person, and saying person because they're non-binary. And it's funny because that was actually the first, encounter I had. And I didn't think anything of it. I was just like, oh, okay, you're chill, you're cool, you're nice, you're a real human, I can touch and whatever, so I just accepted that for what it was. But it took me years and years to fully understand that identity, and for me to accept that within myself, obviously. I feel like when I first came out as trans, I was so fixated on being perfect because, I grew up, you have to be perfect. You have to follow all the rules. You have to get to heaven, And so I think that kind of framework that I had, naturally already in my mind, kind of translated into identity, because religion and God very much was identity for me. Before me was God, And so when I discovered, none of that is valid or truth for me, but what is truth for me is, being attracted to men, being high femme, so let's lean into this. Let's understand this inside of myself. And part of what I learned was very problematic, because even within the trans community, which I love and adore so much, there's still a lot of biases, and there's still a lot of, following of, very white, very European ideals of beauty, very stereotypical, very modern. If we look throughout time in different cultures, femininity, I don't even know how to define that, because it can't be defined, to any one thing at all. But that's another side tangent that I won't get too deep into. But basically, I just had these preconceived ideas of what it means to be trans, of what it means to be a woman. I thought, okay, well, I'm hyper femme. I know I'm not man. I need to ditch that, and I need to get to the opposite end as fast as I can, because the voices that I was hearing was, sure, I had this one non-binary friend, but, the literature I was reading, the successful, happy, celebrity, trans people I was hearing from were non-binary, hyper, on one end of the spectrum, and surged out, which meaning they've had many surgeries in order to transition toward whatever they're going toward, which there's nothing wrong with that. But what I saw was, if I want to be trans, if I want to be successful, if I want to feel beautiful and be loved and have friends and a boyfriend or whatever, I need to do that. You know, that's just how I felt. That's the conclusions I came to. You know, that's not what's being taught, you know, but that's just what I saw and that's what I understood. You know, the history of cinema and the representation of trans people is very, very negative. We're villains, we're murderers, we're murdered or murderers, I mean, and, you know, we weren't ever seen in a positive light for so long, and we're still not viewed in a very positive light often, or we're played by cisgender people who are just ruining the perception of who we are. You know, society and, you know, the perception that I saw in other people, you know, there were issues there, you know, and lack of representation and diversity, but also in the opposite end, I was dealing with my own internalized, you know, turmoil that I had to process. So what is gender? Like, it's a huge question to ask, but I came to the conclusion it's not physical. You know, it has a connection and a relationship to our physical selves, absolutely. But, you know, is it our interest and what we like? No, because that changes. You know, you can't call gender, you know, like the toys that you play with when you're a kid, or the colors that you like, or the clothing that you wear. Because then you're going to invalidate a lot of people, you know, that have never questioned their gender ever. You know, like gender isn't one thing. It's connected to all of those, but you can't pinpoint it to any one thing, you know, because it's so unique for each of us. Look at men in the 18th century. They were all wearing makeup for the gods, like more than a drag queen today would, you know, white face, crazy powder, huge wigs, like that is so feminine to me. They were wearing frilly, lacy shirts and these cute little tight trousers and booties with heels. Like, that's so high femme. Can we address that royalty, you know, for so long, like the men in royalty were so high femme, like, and I love that. That's so beautiful and that's valid, you know, and, you know, so gender is what you make of it. You know, it's so personalized. And so for me, I was just like, yes, I'm hyper femme looking, but inside there's so much masculinity that I love and that I exist in. You know, like I grew up on a farm. I grew up like the second house I lived on, you know, we had like a racetrack in our backyard because we lived on like an acre. It used to be a farm. We didn't want to farm anymore, but my dad was obsessed with motocross. So he dug out the dirt and he made a little racetrack for us. And I rode motorcycles and I dirt biked and I had tree houses at every single one of my houses. And I love to go hiking and wakeboarding, but none of that means anything unless I want it to. You know, like those are perceived as more masculine traits, but why? You know, I'm no less woman, I'm no less feminine, but also like I'm no less masculine either. Like, you know, so for me, I don't know, it's really complicated. It's hard for me to explain because it is controversial and a lot of people question me and try to invalidate me or try to gatekeep, you know, how I should feel. But I honestly feel like the word that exists today that best describes how I feel is genderqueer. You know, I'm fluid somewhere on the spectrum, but I don't think that gender can be simplified to a line to a spectrum. It's bigger. It's a 3D space, maybe sort of spectrum with quadrants or something. You know, I try to visualize gender, but I can't because it's not one thing, you know, it never will be. But for me, I try not to use the word genderqueer often because the word queer is so rooted in hate for so many people, for people that I'm very close to, for partners I've had in the past, to, you know, close friends of mine, you know, to myself and my brother. You know, we were both called queer and made fun of growing up, you know, like that word was rooted in hate for me personally for a long time, you know, but I'm fully on board of the reclaiming of the word and regaining our power in that word. I feel like non-binary is the word I like best because it has a community around it. It has more understanding about it. I love they, them pronouns. I love gender neutral language. I try to use gender neutral language first. You know, that's become my default and it's something I'm still learning and still adapting to. You know, but, you know, I've had partners and I've had friends of mine, you know, start using more non-gendered language to describe me. And that just feels so good. but it doesn't feel any, better than feminine language sometimes.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of non-binary folks out there, and they've kind of been labeled as like androgynous. And in that, you touch on so many things. For one, you're right. Gender doesn't exist. It is a social construct like race. It is a social construct like race. There is like no sign, like there's nothing that says this is how you identify. Like gender has been just what the majority believe it to be in whatever culture that you live in. And in that same way, now that as we progress, even people believe like you have to appear as passing to, be an attractive trans person, or you have to be androgynous to be a proper like non-binary person. And you said it so perfectly. You don't owe that to anyone. No one owes that to anyone. You don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to talk a certain way. You don't have to dress a certain way. You don't have to be any other way than the way you want to be to identify the way you want to be. Period.
Yes. And in that same conversation, I didn't mention this, but I was actually just having this exact conversation last night with one of my other non-binary friends in Portland. And they and I were trying to, talk through this dichotomy of, we don't owe passing to anybody. We don't need to pass in order to be respected or whatever. But, and a lot of us don't want to, especially those, in the non-binary spectrum. And I view non-binary as the umbrella word for those who just aren't man or woman, so like that includes like gender fluid, gender queer, whatever. But there's also this, this issue of safety that we have to talk about in the same discussion, because I feel like I didn't mention this, but for a large part of when I first came out, of me wanting to be so hyper feminine and, wanting every single surgery possible and wanting, whatever, it was also, a large part of wanting to be safe. I wanted to be respected in society. I wanted, to find love. I wanted to feel beautiful, but I wanted to live, and that is just such a simple need, a survival instinct almost, if you will, to survive, to live, because I've received some violence, for being trans in public. I used to work at a restaurant and I used to, be verbally harassed and abused, misgendered constantly. Walking home from that job, which was downtown in Seattle, which is a liberal city, absolutely. One of the highest, LGBTQIA populations, in the world, in this city. But even there, walking home as a trans person, as a baby, young trans person, newly transitioned, whatever you want to call it, non-passing trans person, I have been shoved, pushed, harassed, cornered, chased, grabbed, hit on. I've been in scary situations where, I didn't know, what was going to happen, Luckily, I've never been like assaulted or attacked, in public by a stranger, but I absolutely feared that, and there's so many people who are.
Well, I mean, understandably so, because of especially recent events of what's happened in LA.
Exactly. Well, and that's kind of what I now understand that I didn't then is, look at Eden, look at Jasleen, look at Jocelyn, 3 gorgeous women of color, surged out, like stunning, so passable. Eden is a Latinx trans woman. The other 2 are Black trans women. And the average person would never clock them. I honestly don't know how they were. They all have very large followings, so maybe they were recognized, for their celebrity status, in the trans community, at least celebrity status.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was, honestly, but like, that just goes to show, regardless, we're still trans. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter, where on the spectrum you are of trans, whether you want to pass or you don't want to, or you do or you do not, or, whatever, it doesn't matter. If you're trans, and society still has a problem with that, no matter what you look like or how you present or how you behave. And that's an issue for me, you know, like that is why I share my story. That's why I try to be so public. You know, that's why I give so much of myself to, you know, strangers, you know, online, is because I want to educate people. I want this to change. You know, this has to change, because that gave me a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear. You know, I actually haven't left my house since that happened. You know, I mean, it's COVID, you know, so I don't have a lot of want or need to leave the house anyway, but you know, like I've had the chance to, and I just haven't. But
well, that's completely understandable, and I think pertains a lot to, you know, what you talk about is, you know, coming out, and we kind of feel like you have to go to the extreme, right? You have to be so on one end, right? If you're going to come out as trans, you are the most femme, beautiful, passing trans, you know, that level of perfection. And like, I think that's demanded upon us by the patriarchy, by, you know, white privilege, or, you know, white supremacy. I think, you know, all of that gives us these ideas of how we're supposed to be. And then, you know, we become like a little phobic, because like I think back of like when I came out as bi, and then, you know, I came through the process, and then I was like, no, I'm pretty gay, and I'm a lesbian, and in my early 20s I was so rooted in that identity, and I was also biphobic. I was also like incredibly biphobic and like just rude, and I think you process in your own way at that age, or however old you are, because of what society tells you is this and not this, you know, what's acceptable and what isn't. And you talked about you know, bi erasure, and the way like the community, like the trans community, I think is also treated if you're not like a certain way. And that's all rooted, I think, in this fear and of not feeling safe. That's what that's all rooted in. It's rooted in fear, and it's not feeling safe, because trans women of color are murdered at a disgustingly high rate that I don't understand how this country doesn't grasp it. And I do, because, you know, people are so ignorant, and I mean,
I was,
yeah,
you know, look at where I grew up and where I was, you know, the way that I was raised, you know, in a Baptist church, you know, like didn't mention Baptist, but you know, like there's so much of this country that is just so unaware,
yeah,
you know, and so the exposure that they have, it goes back to that discussion of, you know, the representation that we have in media, you know, that's the exposure they have,
mm-hmm.
you know, so we have to do better there, because, you know, the average person doesn't know a trans person in real life. Well, the average person has met one, but doesn't know it.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, if you know, me walking down the street, bump into some random person at the grocery store, whatever, most people wouldn't know anymore, you know, and that's a weird thing for me. And going off of that same conversation of like, you know, you know, we want to fit into this perfect mold, we want to be safe, you know, because of patriarchy, sexism, you know, transphobia, you know, all of these just social constructs that we try to fit into, and we're kind of forced to in some ways, you know. There's a large part of me now that feels more comfortable, you know, not being binary, because I don't want to feed into those, you know. And so I feel like I also have this dichotomy of wanting to feel comfortable and euphoric and, you know, love my body and feel connected to my body, while also trying to unpackage where that comes from. You know, why do I have dysphoria? You know, why do I not feel good enough? Why do I not like my flat chest? You know, what is it? You know, does that come from, you know, society and patriarchy and transphobia and, you know, sexism, and like where's what part is that coming from? Or is that just me inside not feeling connected? And so I feel like that's hard, you know, and I feel like that's a large part of, you know, I unprocessed a lot of that and started figuring out, okay, no, you know, I don't need to have this. I don't need to do that. I don't owe anything to anybody, you know, and unpackaging a lot of my fears and a lot of my wants did come from that. So I threw that away and I was like, no, what do I want? Listen to me, stop listening to society, the opinions of other people, you know, to, you know, only listen to me and what I want. And that's why I'm so okay with my journey right now. And 12 days, I am having breast augmentation, and I am so excited. And, you know, I have had a couple of people message me or comment very publicly on, you know, like, Rose, you're already so gorgeous. Why would you ever want any surgery? Like, you are perfect the way you are. Like, you say you're non-binary. Like, how could you want this? Like, you know, I've had some feedback that was not positive. And my response is, I'm not coming at this from a place of self-hate or from dysphoria. And for those who do come from that for surgery or transitioning, you're still valid. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, you're trans, you know, live your life, do what makes you happy. You know, your own body, that's not harming anybody.
Absolutely.
But for me, the reason that I'm okay with having surgery, because for a long time I was like, you know, do I want surgery? Where is this coming from? You know, after I had to come out for the 4th time, because I came out as gay and then trans and then bi and then non-binary. So, you know, 4th time a year ago is when I publicly came out. After that moment, I was just kind of like, okay, so what do I actually want for myself? And I've been on this journey of, you know, loving myself radically in this world that tells me I don't deserve to exist, or that I don't. Quite frankly, you know, I'm being erased from the language in our laws, you know, or that attempt is being made. But regardless, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. And I love myself for who I am. I accept myself for the person that I am. I accept my body for what it is, you know, but I still have dysphoria, you know, about my chest. It's my main source of dysphoria. And that's not, you know, and a small part of that comes from society and internalized, you know, transphobia and, you know, the patriarchy and trying to fit into this perfect mold of, you know, the femme ideal, goddess, whatever. But I know that if I never have it, I'll be happy, you know, and I'll be fine, you know, because I've learned to love myself, enjoy myself, you know, and I'm a goddess, I'm a woman, I'm a non-binary person, I'm a trans, you know, beautiful, wonderful human, no matter what, you know, and no one can take that away from me because that comes from me. And so that's why I know I'm ready. You know, that's why I'm having this surgery, because this is an act of self-love, not to run away from self-hate, not to run away, you know, from any negative thing that I feel about myself. And also not to run toward, you know, fitting the perfect ideal or patriarchy or whatever, you know, like, I'm just doing this for me.
You, I mean, touch on so many things. And I appreciate you sharing your journey. One, congratulations, 12 days, that's so soon.
Thank you.
Oh, and I mean, this, I guess we didn't really talk about it, but I guess I do, since you brought it up, the role of like your platform, and like, you know, you do have a platform and you are an influencer, and like people are going to give you their opinions and their thoughts no matter what. I have to say, even in this conversation, like you being so thoughtful in the way you speak and the way you even talk about the word queer, I think is just really beautiful, because there are a lot of people where that word is triggering. And I, you know, I live in Seattle and I identify as queer because it is, you know, kind of that umbrella term. And when I've told older people of that, I mean, predominantly older cis straight people, they've associated it with a negative connotation because that's where they grew up. And so, yes, there's power in reclaiming a word and recognizing where it came from. You do both. And you are just, I think you use this platform you have and you're able to communicate with everyone in such a respectful manner. And obviously they're all going to give you their opinions. And so I guess, what influence does that play on your life?
I feel like the platform that I have has affected me in that I want to make a difference. And I feel like I have this tool that allows me to do so. Mm-hmm. And it humbles me more than anything, because, oh my goodness, I know that I'm a flawed person. I know that I make mistakes. You know, I've, you know, done a lot of things, you know, that I've had to forgive myself for and ask others to forgive me for. And that's something I'm constantly working through. You know, look at the current climate that we're in, you know, we're in the largest civil rights movement still, you know, there are still protests daily, you know, in Portland, it's still a shit show, you know, it's such a mess right now, you know, where I just lived for 6 months, you know, but that was still my home for a minute. And, you know, and I think about that often because a lot of people listen to the words that I share, and that's very intimidating to me. Like often, that makes me so shy and anxious to put out things. I feel like it's very much, it can be draining, but it can also be so empowering and uplifting at the same time. So I'm very careful with what I share publicly. I am, but I do share very personal things more than the average person. I feel like it's more commonplace for trans people to do so now, but um, for the average person, they don't talk about, like, oh, I'm going through this issue, or, I have this childhood trauma, or, like whatever, people don't talk about that usually. And so I give a lot of myself to the public, and a lot of people demand so much of me because of that. Like look at, me going through a breakup this year. I've had a lot of people ask me about it and want me to share what happened or why or what's going on, whatever. And I don't owe that to anybody.
Nope.
That's just a breath of fresh air to say. Like, I don't owe that to anybody, like, I'm in a good place.
Right now. We can make the official announcement right here. Rose is not going to spill the tea on her breakup because you don't owe that.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It's not going to affect you, know that I'm focusing on taking care of myself. I've learned a lot of lessons from it. I am learning about, my own, mistakes and, the things that I've done, that I need to forgive myself for, and, I wish nothing but happiness and the best for, that man. He's still a wonderful human doing great things in the world. And I wish nothing but, happiness for him. But I'm in a new chapter and, I'm still going to share a lot about my life. I'm still gonna, give you access to a lot. I shared, a very low point recently. I was sobbing on camera, literally sharing, that my insurance lied to me, that I had spoken on the phone with an insurance rep. They told me my surgery would be covered, that everything would be fine. And then I, go so far throughout the steps that I'm at my consultation ready to book it. And I'm told, no, your insurance won't cover this. Like, I broke down, that was just too much for me to handle at the moment. I was so overwhelmed because I already, this was already happening, I was right there. I was this close. Like I've tried this process multiple times and each time, for whatever reason, it didn't work. And so to be that close and then have it taken away from me, for something that I should have known, that's such a simple thing. Like, okay, do you cover this or no? That's an easy thing. But I felt like it was important though to share that, because social media is not reality. I show you a specific part of my life. I try to show you the best parts of my life for the most of it. I don't really edit my photos anymore. I like edit the lighting, sometimes stuff like that, but like, I'm not going to change me, my body is what it is, you get what you get. But, I try to be honest because if I had that exposure when I was younger, if I could hear those stories, of darkness turned into light, that would have changed my world in such a large way. And so that's why I think it's important, that's why I do what I do. I don't do it for the fame. I don't do it, for the attention, and that's nice. That feels good. I'm not going to lie. It does feel good, but that's not what it's about for me. Like the best feeling that I get from social media is not from guys hitting on me. It's not from getting, a certain number of likes or follows. I don't care. The thing that matters to me is when people send me messages and tell me, that I've helped them, overcome something, or that I've related to them and that they don't feel alone, or, they've, come out because of it, or they've, found comfort in it, I want to help people like me. And so when I hear those stories, sometimes a little bit too much detail, but when people feel like, that they can come to me and relate to me and not feel so alone, that's what it's about for me. Like, I cry almost every time I receive one of those messages, because it just, if I had that, I wouldn't have, gone through a lot of the struggles that I had to go through, but I wouldn't change it for the world, because now I'm able to do what I do. I definitely talk about my life, to help educate cis people, to help them have understanding and, lose that ignorance, but also, I mostly do it for trans people, so they know what's going on, their options, not feel alone, but yeah, I'm definitely planning to share as much as I feel comfortable at the time. We'll see.
Good for you. I think it's also, like you kind of talk about, your story, your experience is unique to you. And it's not every trans person experience, but it's yours. And some people might
True.
identify with it. And
Yeah.
they might not identify with somebody else's. And I think the more experiences and journeys we have out there, the better. The more education, the more awareness, the more it doesn't have to fit into like these lines or this category or this process or whatever. And I think it's such a gift that you're willing to share that, because that's free education. That is everything. I think, it actually, this is a really good segue, because you're a powerful person, and you were actually featured in a book at the end of last year. It was called Proud Women, a collection of women who are proud to represent the LGBTQ community, by Brittany and Melissa Geltema. Heltema. Oh, Geltema. How do you pronounce that?
We never spoke. We only emailed, so I actually don't know how to say it.
Well, I just want to know what that was like to be featured in that book and that experience.
Oh, it was so out of the blue. Honestly, it was random. It was very exciting though. I think they reached out through Instagram, in my DMs, they slid in there and they were just like, hey, we think you're so incredible. We have this project that we want to do. Mm-hmm. It's like a year out or so, but we wanted to talk to you about it. And that I was just invited to submit a piece of my story. And I was so honored. I was like, oh my gosh, what? You want to, what? You want me in a book? It was really cool. I actually still follow both of them. They're such a sweet couple, and I don't know. I really wasn't expecting that. I didn't know who they were. They didn't, know who I was until that moment. But, it was such a great opportunity, to be given a platform, in such a different way that I'd never had before, to share my story and experience alongside so many incredible people. Oh my gosh. There's some huge names in there. So it's really, really exciting. And then to also, be able to say, I'm publishing a book now as well. My writing is now in a published book. So that's kind of cool. I wasn't expecting that. It's
that's hella cool.
Maybe I'll write a book one day, but who knows, but now I don't have to.
I think it's so cool, and your story is so beautiful, and I think it's natural for them to reach out to you. I'm not surprised they slid into your DMs, because as long as I've known you, Rose, you've always been an amazing advocate for trans and the POC community. I understand, you also identify as, please forgive me, is it Latinx or Hispanic?
Yes, both.
Let's talk about that for just a moment, and how your that identity of your Latin and Hispanic identity intersect with your trans identity.
Oof, yeah, that's a question.
I have Puerto Rican, and I know it is hard in that community, in the culture, I think, to be part of the LGBTQIA community as well.
Absolutely. So my dad's first language was Spanish. He never spoke it at home because he grew up with so much prejudice and so much, racism and discrimination against him. He never wanted that for us. So it's actually kind of hard for me, because I really didn't grow up with most of the culture. I didn't grow up with the language. And, I love my dad's side of the family so much, but there's a lot of dysfunction. And so I didn't really, I just wasn't raised with that side of the family for most of my life. It was kind of off and on. And so it's kind of hard for me, because I feel like I don't really fit into either circle. I don't feel white enough. I don't feel, Mexican enough, because I'm Mexican, and that's where it comes from. And I'm also, I'm mostly white, I'm both, but that doesn't invalidate me either way, in Idaho, you know, there's a large population of Hispanic people, you know, of all different cultures, but especially from Mexico. And so, you know, yes, I'm Rosalind Montoya, but at the same time, you know, I was the white Montoya. You know, I was never, you know, Hispanic enough growing up in Idaho. But then going to Seattle was really weird for me because there isn't a large Hispanic population in Seattle or in Washington State at all. You know, the diversity that's there is mostly Asian, you know, if not white. And then there's, you know, a larger population of Black people than I had ever witnessed before. But I very much stood out as a Hispanic individual in Seattle, you know, because at that point, you know, I had taken multiple years of Spanish lessons. You know, I can speak conversational Spanish. I'm not fluent at all by any means, but, you know, I can sometimes get by a little bit. You know, after I graduated high school, I spent some time in Spain to kind of, you know, better understand, you know, the language. I had a friend that lives there, and so I visited her, and she kind of showed me and my cousin all around the country. And, you know, so at that point, you know, I was very comfortable in Spanish, but I've lost so much of it. But it was weird because I never faced any sort of like pushback or discrimination, you know, for being Mexican until I lived in Seattle, you know. And then for the first time, you know, people were like, oh, you're a Montoya, okay, like Inigo Montoya, okay, yeah, like you're a beaner, right? Like you jumped like the fence, you know, to get here, you know, like where's your family from, you know? Oh, like working at a bar, I was constantly asked like, oh, you're so ethnic, you're so beautiful, where do you come from? Like, do you even speak English? And I'm like, whoa, whoa, okay, I needed to take a breath because I never received that ever in my life, you know? And that's a privilege, absolutely, you know, that I'm thankful for. You know, I never had to face this until I was an adult, you know, where I was more, you know, self-aware and, you know, more comfortable, you know, with myself and everything. I had support, but it was kind of a culture shock, you know, that was the only culture shock I had in Seattle, because otherwise I felt very welcomed there and, you know, had a great community. But some of the strangers, especially working as a bartender, that's where it was the worst, you know, where I would just hear a lot of random, you know, just horribly racist remarks that I just couldn't fathom. I was like, what? Why is this even a thing? But
I was a waitress, and I dealt with similar stuff. And so it's one of the few times I feel like because there isn't a huge like Latinx Hispanic population. I was born and raised here. I'm half Puerto Rican, half white, and I don't speak the language fluently either because my father also endured a lot of racism and prejudice, you know. And I just think, you know, Seattle, people think it's so liberal and it's so open and diverse, but it is a very racist place also to live. And I think a lot of people of color have experienced that. I think comments like that, those microaggressions, and it's hard because with the community here, what there is, it's like if you don't speak the language, you're not like, there's so many contingencies, right? It's like if you don't speak the language, or if you were like, for being Puerto Rican, if you were born and raised on the island, like you're considered Nuyorican, like you're considered kind of like a washed down version. And it's just so disheartening, and I think really kind of like eats away at the community because our ability to speak the language is not a reflection on who we are. And
absolutely.
coming to Seattle for you, it sounds like it was like great for being trans and great for coming out as like a trans person, but maybe not so great coming in as, you know, a Hispanic person. And that's hard.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It was weird, honestly. It was weird to process because I didn't know how to, you know, because for the longest time, you know, I wasn't Mexican enough. And then for the first time, I wasn't white enough, you know, and it was for sure a culture shock. You know, it was definitely a reality check of like, oh, okay, this really is, you know, this is real. This is what other people face all the time, way worse than I do, you know. And that was hard for me to learn, absolutely. But, you know, I'm still so lucky. And now I'm in Arizona where there's, you know, a huge population of, you know, Mexican, Latinx, you know, Hispanic people. And so, you know, again, I'm kind of just that like, you know, I look a little more white here now. So it's weird, you know, because depending on where you are, I feel like that could absolutely affect you, especially as a mixed person, you know, like I'm sure you have some experience, you know, in your travels as well, that same thing.
Mhm.
But,
Yep.
but you know, what I think about, you know, and what does affect me constantly, you know, is the challenges that my community face, you know, as feminine trans people of color, you know, because we have a lot of hate against us in this world. And you know, I feel like coming from those different intersections of, you know, not fully, you know, understanding my culture, but, you know, trying to learn it and reclaim it and learn the language, you know, better. That's a constant battle, you know, that I'm trying to, you know, I want to be fluent, you know, I want to know more, you know, and, you know, but it's made me want to, you know, advocate more for people who have it worse than me. You know, I'm not perfect, I make mistakes, and, you know, even in this conversation, I'm uncomfortable, and that's okay. I accept that I'm uncomfortable, that I am imperfect, that I, you know, I'm still valid and I can still have this conversation with you, you know, and that, you know, and that's a beautiful thing. Um,
Well, I so appreciate you having this conversation with me. I know it's uncomfortable because like you think it's going to get out there, it's going to be on the internet, and like anyone can interpret it any way, and it's hard. And all the same, I think it's very brave. And I can just think about the people who are going to watch and listen and hear it, maybe not immediately, but even just 2 years down the road. And it's going to change something for them, possibly. And that is the whole point of
mhm,
leaning into the discomfort and sharing all
yes,
of this.
absolutely.
How do you choose, or how do you decide how to advocate? I know that's a really broad question, but like you said, you have this platform. How do you make the decisions of like what you choose to, I guess, post or share? What kind of goes into that?
hmm Well, for me, I guess I don't really have a choice in being an advocate or not. I'm shoved into that label whether I want to or not. And I'm at a point in my life where I'm comfortable with that and I want to be, but for a long time I wasn't. You know, because I'm a person, you know, with that lacks a lot of rights, a lot of protections, a lot of opportunities, you know, in this world, in this country, in this city. And you know, and so I'm kind of forced into that identity, whether I want to or not. You know, the simple act of being myself is revolutionary, you know, to quote Laverne Cox, you know, like to be trans, you know, is to fight against, you know, these social, you know, expectations and rules, you know, because I don't fit into that and I never will, you know, but I'm me, you know, and simply being me is radical, you know, and so that's kind of hard to process, I think, especially for you, for, you know, people that are just coming out as trans, because that's a lot of pressure, you know, that's a lot of weight, you know, and it's weird because, you know, I have a hard time, you know, accepting that I'm brave or that I'm courageous. You know, I don't like hearing those words from people that aren't from the community, especially because I don't view coming out as brave. I don't view living every day as trans or going out in public brave. I'm living my life. I'm existing. To exist is not brave, to exist is to be. And if existing and being in this world is so radical, there's not anything wrong with me. There's nothing courageous or brave about me. There's something wrong with the world. And I feel like that's kind of giving in to the idea that society will never change and that this is the way it is, and that, you know, I function in a flawed society. That's the reality. I'm not brave. I just am, and the place that I am is flawed and against me and fighting against me, you know? And so for so many trans people, you know, like I think about like Erin Phillip, you know, amazing, beautiful model. She's a Black trans woman. She uses a wheelchair, and so many people call her an activist, you know, for the disabled community, Black community, trans community, you know, all of these different intersections that she exists in. And she very publicly speaks against that. She's like, no, I'm not an activist. I'm not even an advocate, you know, and which a lot of people don't know the difference between those words, but I'll explain in a little bit more in a second. Like, she's like, no, I just exist in a way that this world doesn't wish to respect yet, and that's just the reality. And so I have to address that, in this conversation, because for a long time, I just was sharing my story. I just wanted to, start talking about what I go through, because when I first came to the conclusion that I'm not religious, I don't believe in God, I, dismiss all of that. I came out with like a sermon, an anti-sermon. I don't even know what to call it. It was this idea, that I'd come to learn by studying the Bible and what it actually says about being gay. That was my focus, specifically on being gay. But it's true, for anyone in the LGBTQIA community, because the Bible really doesn't say anything except to love, put love first, love your neighbor, love the least of these, whatever. And that went viral, and I had so many people reach out to me and tell me that it helped them. And so, 2 years later, when I was trans, I was like, okay, or maybe it's 3, I think it was 3 years later, I was like, okay, that made a difference. I want to continue doing things like that. And so I just started sharing about my journey, sharing what I was going through, sharing, the struggles, that way I could, relate to other people, give people, a future, give them hope, that they can do this, they can be successful, whatever. And then I kind of fell into advocacy from there, because then I started having to fight back. I wasn't given a choice, because I worked at a workplace that refused to change my name in the system, even after it was legal. I legally changed it. It took them, I think, 3 months. I can't remember now. It's so long ago. I think it was 3 months. It took them to change my name in the system. And so for a long time, I was like, hi, I'm Rose, your receipt, the ticket, that you will receive will not have my name on it. It's gonna have someone else, but it was me who helped you. No one else is helping you. I've been here for a long time. This is the situation. It was so uncomfortable. I was misgendered. I was harassed. I had to switch tables often because it was just an awkward situation. And so I had to fight back. I had no choice. I had to take it to HR, and I was being harassed, and the chef didn't want to, gender me correctly. And once I started, conventionally looking like a female and a beautiful woman, one of the older male servers there found me attractive, and then he, harassed me and made me very uncomfortable and made some sexual remarks about me. And so I had to start fighting back. And so at my next job, I started working, for a cosmetics company, which I loved so much. And then I was invited to rather than forced, and that felt good. And being invited to, volunteer for Pride, to, do makeup for the trans community, to, help on, plan, events at Pride, with this company, like that was so incredible. And so starting to meet people and having people, like just help them feel good, help them feel beautiful, help them, just have a moment of happiness or whatever, like that made such a big difference, and I started volunteering with the company, and that just brought me so much joy. And so I wanted to continue doing it. And so I have, and so now, I want to make positive change in this world. And that's why I do what I do, more than just like sharing my story. I try to share other people's stories. I try to feature other people. I try to not just uplift myself, but uplift my community and others, that are different than me, because this world, has gone through a lot, especially lately. And, there needs to be more love in it. It's as simple as that.
I love that. Gosh, you're such a beautiful human being.